We're good, brilliant. Well, folks, very warm welcome to you. Great to see you all. Welcome to this Agile 20 Reflect event. I've got a slides before I kind of start introducing our wonderful guest speakers tonight and give you a flavour for what we're going to be doing tonight. Just want to go through some formalities. So let me just find my slides, if you just bear with me.
Some of us have been able to encourage the family.
Say again? Some
of us have been able to encourage the family.
That's brilliant. That's good. I'm glad when that happens. Right. Hopefully you could all see my slides. So yeah, as I say, this is an Agile 20 Reflect event. Warm welcome to you all. I hope you're enjoying the festival. This is a free event. The whole festival's free. It's been built by volunteers around the globe, so a truly collaborative effort, and we're all very delighted with how things have panned out. We have over 700 events in the festival over the course of February, so do please check out the programme, and I'm sure you'll find lots of other interesting things over the coming weeks for you all to join. I've certainly got various other things that I'm joining as an attendee, so looking forward to sitting back and immersing myself in various subjects and topics. As you can see there in the bottom left, we've got our hashtag. Shelby, my wonderful co-host this evening, we'll put that in the chat for you all, so feel free to use that. Do share on social. One of our speakers says something really profound or awesome, which I'm sure they will. Feel free to retweet that. The website address is in the bottom right corner, so there's lots of content on the site. You can access the calendar and the rest of the event programme, so do take a look at that. And just a shout out for our supporting organisations, just at the top of the slide there. Just quickly then, so this is obviously a community festival. We do have a community policy. Everybody's involved in the festival agrees to adhere to this policy, and that applies at every event. It's really ultimately about respecting one another and being courteous towards one another. We want everyone to have a great experience. If you would like to read the policy, the URL's there. You'll find it on the website. I think there's a link to it in the footer. And as I say, this is free. The whole festival has been built by volunteers. But if you would like to donate, you are able to do that by accessing this URL. It's a kind of call to action on the website. So if you wish to donate, you're welcome to do so, and we would greatly appreciate it. And yeah, the festival is open. I'm gonna have to get rid of this slide because we're several days in now. Yeah, I hope you're all enjoying it. So that's the formalities. I'm glad to get those done. So I'm thrilled to be doing this one tonight because this one's slightly different in theme to some of the other ones that I've hosted so far. Tonight we're going to focus a little bit more on the origins and the history of Agile, and I am delighted to have 5 awesome Agilists join me this evening to share their personal stories and journeys. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a bunch of lightning talks. All of our speakers are going to go for about 10 minutes or so each. I'm not going to put them under too much pressure to stick to that, but that's the idea. So Martin Hinselwood, Martin's going to start us off, and then Portia is going to follow on from Martin. Dave West is going to go in the middle there and do a bit of bringing the bits together. So we're going to tell a little bit of a story here. And then Colleen is going to follow up after Dave. And then we're going to finish with Lindsay. And in a second, I'm going to give them all the opportunity to introduce themselves because it's nice that way. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go through all the sessions. And then at the end of that, we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A. So it'll feel a little bit like a panel. So if you wouldn't mind keeping your questions until the end and let the speakers go through their talks. And then Shelby's going to help me facilitate that. So you could put your questions into the chat window. But if you could let us know who the question's for, or if you're happy to do so, we're happy for you to raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can ask your question, whatever your preference is. We really don't mind. It's whatever you're comfortable with. So that's all I was going to say for now. I'm now going to ask all my wonderful guest speakers to introduce themselves. Martin, can you start us off?
I can. My name's Martin Hinselwood. I'm a professional Scrum trainer, professional Kanban trainer. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in DevOps. I'm going to be talking about the really old history of, not maybe say of agility, but why we need it in the first place.
Fab. Brilliant. Portia?
Hi, I'm Portia Tung. I'm an Agile coach, an executive coach, and also a play researcher. So I'll be sharing my personal retrospective of my Agile adventure and include some lessons learned and some tips going forward.
Excellent. Really looking forward to that. Dave?
Hi, everybody. I'm Dave West. I'm the CEO and product owner of Scrum.org here in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm going to be talking about my journey to Scrum as the, I guess, reformed RUP product manager and the journey that took me on, which hopefully will illustrate some of the characteristics of Agile and some of the things I learned along the way, which may or may not be interesting.
I'm sure it's going to be fab. Colleen, you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm also an Agile coach. Seems to be a theme here. I have been in the space for about 10 years. I've taken Agile to places that perhaps aren't typical. So to crisis response, to flipping houses. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Kanban, very briefly on the history of Kanban, and then my own personal history of Kanban and what I learned about making sure that we can take a look at the bottlenecks that come up and how we can actually perhaps even get ahead of them.
Excellent. Sounds fantastic. Can't wait to hear more. Lindsay, last but not least, want to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, I'm Lindsay Tulloch. I'm not an Agile coach, but I am a community engagement consultant. What does that mean? Well, quite a lot of different things in different environments, but basically I have an absolute passion for communities of practice and why we just need to engage together, but with purpose. So ask not what your community can do for you, but what you can do for your community. So really looking forward to the chats today. And that's it for me, and the rest is in the next 10 minutes or so chat. So thanks, Saf.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lindsay. Excellent. Can't wait. I too am very passionate about building communities and communities of practice, as is Shelby. So really can't wait to hear your thoughts, Lindsay. Fab. Right. And that's the introductions done. I think we'll kick off. We've got 5 exciting talks to look forward to, all quite different in flavour, but I think it's all going to hang together nicely. So without further ado, Martin, you're on. Kick us off.
I will share my screen. Let's get the right one. Did I share the right one? Awesome. David's giving me a thumbs up.
You're good.
I think I'm gonna set my little timer so I know exactly how long I've got. For me as an individual, I find it very difficult to really understand something unless I know why it is. I find it very difficult just to deal with something as it is. I want to know why, because that gives me more insight into how I might fix it. And for me, Waterfall had always been the boogeyman, but then I realized recently over the last few years that it's really just the boogeyman's henchman. And the real boogeyman here is Taylorism. So what I wanted to do in the short time I have is just talk about that below. You know, it's like an iceberg. Waterfall's sitting on top and it looks like it's the problem, but actually it's way bigger than that and impacts way more than that. So some things, this idea of Taylorism, which I am going to explain and why it exists. But it's resulted in a number of things that exist in our world, from a fundamental distrust of employees all the way over to having managers and departments and hierarchies inside of organizations. These are all aspects of that story. So where did this come from? How did we end up in that space? Well, we kind of need to go back in time a little bit, about 130 years. just to talk about what was happening in the world before the Industrial Revolution. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, manufacturing tended to take place near homes in small workshops. Compensation came through earned value and was kind of based on how well a person made a product, how useful it was to the buyer. In other words, there was purpose to people's work. Mastery enabled the master and apprentice system, where the knowledge was handed down through generations, and people could choose to work hard and get better at what they did. So they had more time to spend doing other things. And then something changed in the world. The Industrial Revolution came along, and the world kind of changed forever. We made a lot of money during the Industrial Revolution, but we lost something. We lost the soul of work. And that's because we didn't have robots, but we needed the job of robots to be done. And the only robots we had available were people. So we had to have people doing those jobs. And it made them very unhappy, very disconnected from the work. And there's a massive difference between these two stories. Everybody sitting in rows just doing one thing repetitively. It does not enable us to do the best we can as humans. Whereas that building the best shoe that I can for the people that I provide it for is maybe more fulfilling work. And it actually comes down to this gentleman here. This is where Taylorism, the phrase, comes from, Frederick Winston Taylor. And I love this phrase. I know I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to say it anyway. Hardly a competent worker can be found who does not devote a considerable amount of time to studying just how slowly they can work and still convince their employer that they're going at a good pace. This is the fundamental underpinning of almost all modern management practices that has resulted in so much pain for all of us in organizations and such a struggle moving towards agility. This dude has a lot to answer for. He provided benefits at the time, but that's sucking the soul out of everything and creating organizations that did not trust their employees was part of the problem. He basically came up with this thing called the scientific management method, developing standards for performing each job, dividing people into appropriate ability-based groups, silos and departments, training people only in that one job where you have that one focus and specialism. Think of your university majors that you have. You're only focused on solving one problem. And we want to train those workers in standard methods, remove thinking because they just need to do what they're told, and we're going to create wage incentives for increased output. That is Taylorism in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it than that, and it's more complicated, but I only have 5 minutes left. So I do want to mention that somebody who followed Taylor was a gentleman who you've probably heard his name many, many hundreds of times over your years of work. And that's a gentleman called Henry Gantt. You've probably heard his surname often. Yes, that Gantt. And he actually was the one that came up with the task and bonus system. He created a basic wage level based on expected low performance, because remember, we don't trust people. And then you only get your bonus if you achieve more or exceed the expected proficiency. And then, because this is a good idea, we're going to bonus managers based on their staff's effectiveness as well. Not that that's going to produce any negative behavior. And I think that it's maybe these ideas weren't even new at the time. They did have a foundation, but they brought it over to the modern school system as well, which was developed a little bit before, but fulfilled the same idea. Think about the old school system that many of us, I know David went through this, same as myself, rewards for fulfilled tasks. Everybody sits in rows. Everybody has to do the same thing at the same time. No talking and incentive-based learning. There's no difference between these two things. The modern school system creates factory workers. That's what it's for. That's what it's been used for many years. And unfortunately, we are the product of that system. And we've had far too much indoctrination into that model where it's very difficult for us to escape. I know that many, if you're on this call and you're much younger than me, which is probably many of you, if you went to school maybe in the last 30 years, you might have had a progressive teacher that bucked the system and had people working in groups, had people doing goal-based activities and sharing their learning with each other. Maybe you went to Montessori, which is kind of halfway into this story that we're talking about. But for most people, they ended up being governed by the rule that these folks were pushing us towards, which is optimizing for output, not outcome. Because outcome was guaranteed because we're making widgets in a factory. Output was the only thing that we needed to control and get more of in their world. So they came up with a solution. And unfortunately, that solution then spawned the first MBA in 1908. This is the graduating class of the very first MBA, where all the sons of the wealthy leaders and managers and business owners of the time were sent to learn these new magical practices, and then they went off around the world and spread Taylorism. I would say like a cancer. There's nothing positive about it, and we really started to end up in this position of the waterfall. So waterfall was a result, not a cause of this thing. And I'm sure you've encountered it before. And unfortunately, one of the largest purchasers in the world, Dave, that's your adopted country there, the US military industrial complex that has 2.8 million employees currently and spends upwards of $850 billion every year, pushed these practices, enshrined them in the way we do things, and they just became part of everybody's procurement processes because they fostered it upon us. And that brings us to the result, which I'm sure some of the other speakers will talk about as well. Obviously, things did not go well when we started to apply these ideas to the more creative work that's happening in the modern world, starting with software development. And that was my timer. So over to Seth.
I was bang on. I'm really impressed. There we go. No, I've seen this. I've seen this talk before, and it's nice to see it kind of condensed like that. That was really quite good. Thanks, Martin. So that sets the seed for us. So I think you get a little bit of the history. Well, why did Agile come about? So let's move on to Portia and hear a little bit about her early story and some of the early days of Agile. Portia.
Thank you. Can you see my slides and hear me okay?
Can do. Yep. You're all good.
All right. So welcome, everyone. I'd like to send you a postcard, if you like, from my Agile pilgrimage to Snowbird and back again. I'm just going to take a moment to see if I can get my video back. Give me 1 second. There we go. That works. Lovely. So we're going to travel in time, in style today, as you can see, no expense spared, and in great company, as we already know. So we go straight back to Chicago in 2008, where there was this Agile Alliance organized conference, and it's very popular now, I know. But even back in the day, there are two things you need to know about this ginormous conference that gets run every year, including this year, and it's this. The first thing is that it's really hard to get a proposal accepted, right? Think about challenge and contribution. And then the second thing is that it's really a lot of fun. So I'd encourage you to submit this year and just go through that process, but also to join in if you can. So when I was there back in 2008, that was the first time I heard that the Agile 2011 conference will be in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I thought, oh, you know, that's practically the Mecca of the Agile Manifesto. And I made a wish then, wouldn't it be nice if I got the opportunity to present a session, to contribute, and then also to make my own journey to Snowbird, you know, and see the venue where the manifesto was created. You know, I'm just kind of geeky and passionate like that. And another reason I continued going to that conference for many years and continued submitting and setting myself that challenge is because once a year or thereabouts, a group of us would gather together from all different parts of the world, and we would share our Agile games and techniques. And it was the best way for me of collecting these precious and useful souvenirs that I could then take home to share with my colleagues and friends when I got home. And here you can see we are testing the business value game that was invented by Pascal there, who's facilitating, and his friend Vera. So we're back to Salt Lake City, moving forward in time. It's now Agile 2011. And the good news is I did get a session accepted, and it was an Agile fairy tale. I'd originally created Agile fairy tales back in 2008 because I'd noticed that we'd forgotten the human side, you know, like Martin said about work, and it was just all about the drudgery. And in order to bring that humanity back, I invented Agile fairy tales, remembering the lessons we learned as children, but have since forgotten. And the one that got chosen was The Emperor's New Clothes, meaningful interactions in stressful situations, with my friend Jenny Yepsen. Now, I hadn't forgotten the other part of my wish for 2011. And so I managed to put together, assemble a trio of people to go on this pilgrimage with me. So there was the Dane there on my right, as you're looking, Carsten Rusang, and then on my left there, if you're looking, is Henry Schneeberger, who wrote Scrum and XP in the Trenches. Now, I actually went around the conference and I was very sociable. I pushed myself outside of my comfort zone, and I did invite a lot of people I met and said, you know, fancy this pilgrimage, we can all go, it could be interesting. And what people would do mostly was look out the window and say, well, Portia, we're practically there. I'd just rather stay here with my beer. So in the end, it was just 3 of us. But you know what? Different strokes for different folks. People all play in a different way. Now, I thought we had it in the bag already until we got to reception. And I realized I had to convince this lovely man, Monty, the receptionist, to let us in to the room called the Lodge at Snowbird in order to see the place where the manifesto was created. So I really had to put my negotiation and persuasion skills to the test. And I started telling him, you know, Monty, in 2001, a bunch of IT geeks got together and they created this thing called the Agile Manifesto, which has positively influenced all the IT professionals around the world. You know, it's a bit like the Magna Carta. And yeah, you know, Monty kind of listened and nodded. And I thought, okay, you know, for as long as he's there, you know, we still in with the chance. And I said, we've come halfway across the world. Would it be possible for us to see this room? And guess what Monty said? Well, Monty said, well, I used to be an IT professional before I got this job. And it's just great to hear that the way we're treating our IT professionals is changing for the better. Could I have a look at that Agile Manifesto? So all of us crammed into his little office. We brought up the Agile Manifesto. We read it word for word. And actually, it was such a touching moment as each of us reflected on what brought us there. And actually, we're just all human beings trying to do a good job, right? And Monty took us to the room, the lodge at Snowbird, if ever you want to go there yourself. And we rattled off the Agile Manifesto. And of course, we took a group picture as well. And really, it was our way of paying homage, if you like, to our mutual Agile ancestry and creating a little bit of Agile history, really. Now, a lot of people ask me, how is it that I seem to have so much fun at work, in spite of very often the difficulties and challenges? Well, my secret is I met two very playful Belgians back in 2007 at XP Days London. And you will recognize Pascal van Kaanberg from the earlier slide. And here is Vera Peters. And if you ask me, they were the early pioneers of gamification in a good way in the Agile community. And for me, their biggest gift was the XP game. And you can still download the details, you can adapt it to be Scrum, whatever it is you like. And now I reflect back, I realized that gift enabled me to travel around the world for the next 12 years, sharing and spreading the joy and bringing back humanity to the workplace, where otherwise people would have been, quickly reduced to Agile zombies and shuffling down the corridors. Now, for those of you who are playful, and certainly from my play research, what I've noticed is that the more you play, the more playful you become, and the more playful you become, the more interested you are in a greater challenge and hopefully a greater opportunity to contribute. So I decided to set myself the challenge of writing a book, and it's called The Dream Team Nightmare. It's a choose your own adventure book where you get to play an Agile coach, and you have 5 days to save a failing Agile team. Perhaps that sounds familiar. And what I realized was that many of the readers would come up to me and say, I really enjoyed that book. It was one of the most enjoyable books I've read about on Agile. And really that comes as no surprise because it was just such great fun to write. Now, truth be told, a couple of years after that was published by Pragmatic Bookshelf, I found myself surrounded by hordes of Agile zombies, with all respect. And when I say Agile zombies, I mean the people who talk the talk, but don't put in the effort to do the walk. And one day I woke up and I noticed myself doing the zombie shuffle, and things just got really, really ugly. And I started seeing signs everywhere, and there was no denying it, that the universe perhaps was trying to send me a message. So I decided to do something about it. But really what pushed me over the edge was when I started hearing some adults at work saying, well, play is a very childish thing. You'd think that adults would have better time, better things to do with their time. And at that point, I put my foot down and enough was enough. So I cleared the board, I changed my game, and I went back to what I did best, which was working with people who cared about people. And the moment I did that, it brought back all the memories of what it felt like when I came across the 5 values of extreme programming in the second book by Kent Beck, which was communication, simplicity, feedback, courage, and respect. Now, not being a religious person, but more maybe of a spiritual one, for me, that was a real big shift in understanding what being value and values driven actually means, and feeling and living the power of that, and seeing what happens when we prioritize and plan in that way. So I dared myself to go a little bit further and deep dove into, way beyond those cold waters of that iceberg, and really had a look at what is my life's purpose. It's so easy to simply waste it away. And lo and behold, that's when I decided to start my school called the School of Play, dedicated to promoting happier adulthood through lifelong play. All of a sudden, I opened the arena and met lots more people beyond the Agile community, adults who really secretly believed that play was good for you. And here was a chance. And there is something so magical when you get to meet and play with strangers as adults. There is something in the air and the experience that is so transformative. If I were able to bottle it and share it with you, I would. It's simply remarkable. And it wasn't all easy peasy, of course. And as we see here, obstacles are proof that you are moving forward. You know, it's almost like some laws of physics in action there. And just when I was starting to have some doubts, I got an email from the Agile Alliance, would you believe? And they said, would you like to come and do the closing keynote for us at Agile 2019? And that was a great moment for me, only because I thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice one day if I had come up with something, another gift to the Agile community that was significant enough that the community would benefit from. And that's because I came up with the concept of playful leadership, which is about enabling transformational change and having fun doing it. So I'd like to share with you the 3 rules, if you like, I follow with the playful leadership. And nowadays, I spend most of the time accompanying leaders and their leadership teams on both personal and organizational transformation journeys. And pretty much the acid test for me is actually running and starting your own ukulele club. And here you can see we're doing this in a financial institution once a week almost, and in reception where everyone could see and hear us. And the amazing thing was people would cheer us on, and that was the most remarkable thing for me. And they'd look forward to seeing us the next week. So top tip number 1 for playful leadership, support leaders who care about people. This might sound obvious, but this will certainly optimize your time, I think. The second top tip to playful leadership is to support leaders who invest in their people's learning and development. And here's a group of social workers, actually, that I play with that work with adults with severe disabilities. And when we talk about making a difference to people's lives every day, these lovely people do it every hour, every minute. And the tip number 3, support leaders prepared to change themselves for the better. That's perhaps the trickier one to follow. And I challenge you to spot the CEO in this picture because they're in here. And the beauty of play is that it levels the playing field so that everyone gets the opportunity to show up as they are, not to be judged, and to be at their best. And I promised that I'd leave you with a couple of lessons that I've learned when it comes to being agile. And for me, the biggest lesson is self-care. And an example of that is sustainable pace. And that is, I think, the most important one, and easily the one that most people fall at the first hurdle of. The second lesson would be, it's all about challenge and contribution. It's not about practice makes perfect. For me, it's about practice making better and having lots of fun, making friends along the way. And the third lesson is feedback. And by that, I mean, you know what? Take a breath in, take the time and smell the flowers as you go, right? When else are you going to do it? And maybe even glance at a shop window or 2 and stay on the lookout for signs so that you know whether or not you're on the right path. So I thank you so much today for joining us, Marty, Doc, and Einstein, on this brief retrospective of my personal Agile adventure. And we return just in time for the next speaker, Dave West. And here's wishing you all a playful Agile adventure with love from me, Portia Tung. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Portia. That was great. Loved all the images and pics and tried to recognize people. I spotted a few familiar faces there, and that was great. I think we can keep that theme going then, because I think Dave's going to talk about some personalities on his own journey and some of the things he's encountered and some of the transformations he's seen and made. Dave.
Thanks, Seth. And thanks, Portia. That was really interesting. It's yeah, I was at many of the same conferences and unfortunately missed your keynote because I broke my ankle, so I couldn't attend, unfortunately. But it was great to see that and a lot of really good messages there. So my own personal journey begins about 18 years ago when I met Ken Schwaber. Now, I've got to admit, I was the RUP product manager when I met him. So you can imagine Darth Vader meets, I don't know, Yoda or some such moment. I'm not saying who was Darth Vader. And he told me something very, very insightful. He says, "You're an idiot." And it turns out he was right, but I didn't realize that straight away. Obviously, I railed against it, arguing that the Scrum was just too. I mean, I've looked at your Scrum and I say, so what? I've got 400 megabytes of detailed process description on a tool for customizing it. I've got thousands of people practicing it every day. How can you possibly be right? Now, there's a lot of good in Rash Unified Process, a lot of fantastic ideas around architecture, around design, around thinking about work, but there's something fundamentally missing from RUP. And it's really what Martin and Portia both talked a little bit about, and that was the ultimate lack of people and teams, and people delivering value with purpose, and people being given the freedom and the guardrails to do that effectively. I listened 18 years ago to Ken. He gave a talk, and he talked about three things that I thought were like, what? You say tomato, I say use case diagram. And there was a disconnect. Empiricism, self-organization at that point, self-management today, continuous improvement. Those concepts were just alien because ultimately the RUP didn't trust the people, really, which is what Martin was talking about with Taylorism and Mr. Gantt and the like. It encouraged a process, and then some magical architect or designer brought it all together, and it all worked marvelously. Everybody contributed their bit and did it to the finest of their ability, but it didn't actually add value as a whole necessarily. And it really came to a head at a large insurance company in the middle of America, probably one of the largest, and they're so big they sort of own the town. And I went in and I met this lovely lady who was so positive about RUP and had a t-shirt and was excited that I was there and all that stuff. And she told me, I said, so what do you do? She goes, I'm a use case specifier. I was like, well, that's interesting. I don't know, what's your job title? That is my job title. Oh. And what use cases do you work on? What line of business? Oh, I don't know. I'm not interested in that. I just specify use cases. I get this requirements BRD and I take it and turn it into use cases and then express that on a sequence diagram. And then it goes to somebody else. I was like, do you work? I mean, how does it? And I realized that she was not fulfilled, really. She did not deliver value, really. And frankly, everything I'd been doing for the years as the product manager was a complete waste of time. Not complete waste of time. Obviously, I had a lot of fun along the way. And I learned lots of things about how to work with methodologists, which was an interesting experience, and how to think about work and process. But unfortunately, the RUP was not going well. So I then went to work with Ivar Jakobsen, the creator of use cases, and run his business for him. And that taught me many things. One, how to bring Scrum and some of the ideas of architecture and use cases together. And we started working on that at a large investment bank together. Working with Ivar was an interesting experience. But it actually worked, Scrum. Some of the other things, maybe not so much. I think my view on architecture was a little flawed, but ultimately it worked. And we took that empiricism, we used it. So we incrementally built the use cases based on what, the most important flow first. And then we proved that worked. And then we brought all these things together in a really interesting way. Now, Ivar didn't particularly like Scrum at that moment. He now subsequently is working a lot with Jeff Sutherland and others on Essential Scrum, so apparently he does now. So he and I sort of parted ways very amicably, and I went to run the research division at Forrester that focused on it. And the reason why I did that was because I'd seen it work at this investment bank, but I'd never really done any research on it. I didn't really know whether this was an unusual situation, because the people there were incredibly smart, and we were very motivated, or they were very motivated with bonuses and the like, and it seemed to be aligned, or whether this was an anomaly. And it turns out it was an abnormality. We did lots of research and we found that the majority of the world was doing something called water, scrum, fall. Interesting. So they loved Scrum, and then when in a survey, if you said what process are you doing, they'd say Scrum. Sometimes they'd write it in uppercase, but that was an aside. They'd say, yeah, we're doing Scrum. It's awesome. I say, okay, that's brilliant. So tell me a little about planning. Oh, we only plan once a year. Gosh, truth. How can we do that? It's an awful experience that normally we have to sacrifice 2 lambs, and it's a horrible experience. We can't afford the lambs that we can do it more than once a year. Okay, so you do it once a year. And then so you frequently release. So you've got no. We would. But there's, compliance, that's always that, governance is always that special magic that you bring in when you don't quite want to do something. We have compliance, and obviously our users don't want us to release more frequently. Oh my God, it's awful. When was the last time you updated your Microsoft products? It's awful. You have to, things go wrong, your machine sits there for hours doing, no, we can't do that. So we release like 4 times a year. Okay, cool. So water, scrum, fall. So I found that over and over again in organizations. And I think it's really a testament to what Martin was talking about. And I'm going to reinforce this in a minute, actually, that that Taylorism, that way of thinking, that natural, is ultimately how organizations are constructed. And that even though we've got a really quite fabulous approach called Scrum, I mean, it could be something else. I'm not, particularly religious, but this really great way of teams working together to effectively deliver value in an incremental fashion in these complex environments, learning as they're doing, empowered to make decisions, all of that stuff. That's brilliant. But unfortunately, the organization's built around other concepts, around risk, around power, around position, around promotion, around incentives and bonuses, around just around the way that they work, because everybody else works like them. When I first met so I moved to America 20 years ago, and when I met my mother-in-law, and I moved her broomstick and stepped by her cauldron. No, sorry, that's not at all what my mother-in-law was like. She's lovely. Guess what was the first thing she said to me? She goes, are you a manager or a director? I was like, oh. Because hierarchy and position is reinforced in society as well, and that's not a surprise. That it doesn't work, that Scrum didn't work. So we did lots of research. We found some examples where it did, and obviously they're the poster childs, and a lot of them are software oriented companies. Microsoft obviously went through a huge transformation. Obviously the likes of Amazon and all these organizations in parts did it right. So we found many examples. Incredible Software is another great example. We found these examples, but they were unusual. So I then decided, in a crazy ass moment of complete stupidity, considering I had a mortgage, to work at a startup. So after my wife picked her up off the floor, as I said, no, I'm going to halve my salary because it's all stock and it's going to be brilliant. I then took over product and engineering for a company called TaskTop. And what that taught me, that it was relatively easy to do it. So we did it. We had one Scrum team. It was brilliant. We were using Scrum. Everything was fantastic. We had some issues with sprint goals, but we worked through that. We did really, really well. But then when we got investment and funding, and we grew the team to 5 teams, when we had a support organization, when we had marketing and product and all these different bits, when we were over 100 people, guess what I started to do? Introduce very Tayloristic models. It wasn't actually particularly about trust. It was more about risk. We had more to lose. It was more about me it's not that I didn't trust them, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody was going in. I was always worried that things were going wrong. And so I tried to, now I know, and Martin would hit me with his haggis and tell me that I was ridiculously silly because, of course, Scrum and these iterative approaches, it's very obvious when things are going wrong. Just integrate more frequently, you idiot. And I know, but I put in all these management, we pulled out HR, we did all sorts of things. And then Ken was my mentor during this whole time. And he told me that I was being an idiot again, but in a much nicer way. We made peace, Ken and I, when I was working with Eva. We had lunch together, and suddenly we became friends. And so through his mentorship, we managed to fix TaskTop so it was delivering value continuously, and all the mistakes of Taylorism and this industrial thoughts were moved away. Now, during that time, it turns out he wasn't mentoring me, he was actually interviewing me. Didn't realize that. And I then joined scrum.org. So just before I leave you, so what I've learned at scrum.org is something a little different. I've learned the value of community. I've learned the support network that you need. I've learned the importance of values, consistent values. And we by accident, we got them at TaskTop, but many of these organizations I worked with previously didn't. Outcomes, a focus, and a clearly defined, articulated product goal. Those things become super important. And the other thing, and I think Martin's taught me this perhaps more than any, is discipline. This maniacal focus on done, getting things out, proof of the pudding is in the eating. So my journey from product manager to, I guess, CEO of scrum.org has been an interesting one, and one filled with many insights and many personalities, from Ivar Jakobsen, Ken Schwaber, Philip Christian, all these interesting characters in our industry. But all of it has reinforced the importance of people working to a value-based system in a disciplined way, focused on a customer, using empiricism and self-management and continuously improving as that sort of like essence to deliver value. And it's been an interesting journey. And I wanted to share that with you. Hopefully it's been a little bit interesting to you. Might have been incredibly boring, but don't worry. There's 4 other people that are far more interesting than me to talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. No, that was great. Loved your reflections. Give you a little tweet as well and tagged in Ken. We'll see what he comes back with.
Thanks. Appreciate
Brilliant,
that.
great. Khalid, you're up next. You've got a
Absolutely.
nice personal journey of your own.
A little bit of a journey, and perhaps
Fantastic.
you might see a common theme. Can you see my screen?
I can. You're all good.
Wonderful. Okay. So, a bit of I'm going to mix some personal with some professional, but a lesson of what I learned about how to set up things for success, and perhaps a bit of responsibility in the mix as well. So, I actually started my Scrum journey well after all of this. And many people think of Kanban, and they think that it started in the 1940s with the Toyota production system. But the truth is, Kanban, which literally translates to sign card, started in the 1600s, well before many people even thought about it. And the whole purpose of this is that you had a bunch of shops and vendors that were on very crowded streets, and they made just simple signs to describe what they were offering. And in the 1940s, that approach was adapted for the Toyota production system. And eventually, a brave group decided to try adapting it to information technology. And in 2010, David J. Anderson wrote a book, and here we are 10 years later. And Kanban is perhaps even the hottest trend right now in the Agile space, other than the Scaled Agile framework. And I don't really want to talk about that today. So my personal agility journey started about the same time. When we bought a home that needed lots of renovations, we actually had the skills in our family for a lot of it, but we were a blended family that had 6 children, young children. And we knew as a result of that, we were going to have really limited time and money for the work. We could do a little work during the week, but major activities could only happen on the last weekend of the month when we didn't have our children. And I had just learned Scrum at work. How convenient. So I quickly assumed the role of product owner, because coming from a traditional project management background, before that, I was a developer. I thought about how to manage the project. And For me, Scrum Master was my role at work, and I didn't necessarily want to be a Scrum Master at home. So we talked about it. Product owner seemed to be the right role. And as a result, and I understood that it was all about goals. It wasn't about output. It was about what are we really trying to accomplish? So we would create month-long sprints because we knew that we could only do this once a month, the major activities, and a major deliverable would happen at the end of each month. And that worked 3 times in 6 months. It didn't really work for us. Thankfully, we did a bit better in my profession, my job. I was working with Scrum teams, and as a Scrum Master, I was much, much better at this. But I forgot about the whole goal. And just like many people have talked about, the whole zombie Scrum thing started to happen a little bit. And I didn't really love it. It didn't just happen at work, it happened at home, where we were doing Scrum, but perhaps it wasn't really necessarily working for us. And in 2013, I moved to a different state. So you can see we actually use Scrum to flip our first house. In 2003 was before Scrum. 2009, this was pure Scrum, but we really kind of didn't do well at it. And then in 2013, moved to a different state. This is the state of Florida, which is where I currently live. Different set of teams. These teams that I were working with at work were using Scrum and failing at it, kind of like we had as a family. The problem wasn't the team, although everybody wanted to point fingers at the team. The problem wasn't my family or even our application and how we were using Scrum. It's that for some reason, that framework just wasn't a fit for us. There was too much work and not enough people. And that's a pretty common thing that happens. But in this case, and I see this happening, I tell you so many times where I come into an organization and they don't think about the single product owner. They think about, well, we have all these different things that we need to get done. And we have all these different product owners that are managing these things. And this team, one team had 5 product owners. And one of them happened to be the vice president in charge of the team. So the team was struggling. And one of the reasons was because the VP was who they reported to. And when there was a question of order or priority, or perhaps even an interruption to that sprint, who do you think won? It was the VP. Personally, I wasn't satisfied with doing Scrum in what we were doing in the home. So we started to search for something else. And what we found at that point, because I was a Scrum junkie, to tell you the truth, I actually think that, if you had put Scrum into my veins, I would have morphed into some superhero. And I am no superhero. But what I found was Scrumban. Corey Lattis actually wrote a book about that in 2009, perfect timing. We found it around 2013, 2014. And Scrumban is that blend of Scrum and Kanban. And it's been criticized because many people take Scrumban and they turn it into Scrum But we realized that principles and values were what was the most important. We needed to focus as a family on those, not on the work, because people ended up feeling like they were being pushed and perhaps even driven a little bit to get the work done. So we focused on flow-based work. And for the team, we actually changed those metrics. The team switched, so did we. And that team within 3 months reduced their cycle time from well over 2 weeks, because we would get to a demo and they would have absolutely nothing to show that was ready to be seen yet. But they reduced their cycle time from not being able to finish whatever they were trying to accomplish within 2 weeks to 2 days. And they did that by working closely with the person who was asking them to get that stuff done, with people who had a goal. They absolutely had products and they had a goal. And the team would work with each person at a time. What is the goal you're trying to accomplish? What is the needle you're trying to move? And what do we as a team need to do as a result of that? 2 weeks to 2 days was pretty impressive. And we moved into this white home pictured here after one weekend of work, ripping up smelly carpets and flooring. Matter of fact, so smelly, I can remember my nostrils, I think, still burn from that smell. But because we understood it was all about a goal, and our goal at that point was to get out of where we were living because that wasn't working for us. We moved into this house with one bedroom with a functioning kitchen, one bedroom that was ready. And we learned, we kept using Kanban, we kept evolving those incremental, very, very small evolutionary changes. And it started to become something that we all look forward to. And by 2016, we had completely evolved to Kanban. And these homes here, by the way, these are final pictures after, well, this one was so old. We owned that so long ago. That's not really one I took. But these were after the renovations that we had completed. They were pretty rough. And this home here was in such bad shape that there was an indoor swimming pool in the Florida room. And there wasn't supposed to be one there. Rain was literally dripping down in that room, creating about a 3 to 4 inch deep pool of water every time we got any sort of rain. And in Florida, most people think of that being sunshiny, but the truth is we have this entire season from May to about, well, it seems to be extending more and more, at least November 30th, where it rains, we get tropical weather. So we moved into this home without a functioning kitchen, but we did have a non-leaking roof. And that was our goal, to get into a house that didn't leak on us, to get out of a rental property that we were paying for that we didn't really like living in, and to get into our home. And with the help of Kanban, we got a lot of work done on this home with 3 people in less than 2 months. We reached every goal we set, or at least mostly. I mean, sometimes we didn't achieve our goals, but we were able to adjust very quickly and say, okay, that goal, perhaps we wanted, at one point we wanted to just plant a palm tree, and the palm tree was more than we could handle because it was well above our head. And we decided, instead of us doing the palm tree, we were going to farm that one out and go ahead and bring external help in. So we didn't reach that goal, but we reached most of them. And it was very different experience than Scrum. Not that Scrum is a bad framework, it's a great framework, but it's all about applicability to what we're doing. And for us, that was the right framework to do. So in 2019, we actually sold this home. Somewhere along the lines, we didn't set out to start to buy homes, fix them up while we were living in them, and sell them. That wasn't our intent. We wanted to live in a home that perhaps we couldn't otherwise afford. That was our goal. To live in a neighborhood that was 6 children was safe. And so we would go buy the stinkiest, smelliest, ugliest home that you could find in a neighborhood that we wanted to live in. So what did I learn over the course of all of this stuff? Well, I learned that in Kanban, we start with what we do now, right? I learned about Kanban, the principles of the Kanban, the practices of Kanban, but we start with what we do now. We visualize our workflow, limit work in progress, apply some constraints so that we can reveal the bottlenecks in our workflow. And for me, at the start of it, I sometimes considered a person being the bottleneck, as in, I can't get so-and-so's attention. You know what, Seth, he's just so busy and he's a bottleneck in the process, right? So what did I learn there? Really, really valuable is people are not the bottleneck. They're standing at the bottleneck. And people who are standing at the bottleneck are usually trying to get the heck out, but they often need help. And what if those people just have needs that are not being met? Reaching our potential as individuals, teams, and companies, as described, shown here in the hierarchy of needs, which, by the way, a long story, that's not really a hierarchy, by the way. Most people think that it's a hierarchy, but it really wasn't like structural like we have it now. But in order to achieve that potential, it's often all about finding out what the need is and filling it. Towards the end of our last big flip, we had 6 people, my husband, who's highly skilled, me, I got some skills, but I'm not that great. And we brought in people who were volunteering because we didn't have money to pay them. And they volunteered, 4 friends and family members who had little or no skills, or so we thought. And that's where the table of need came in. 7 remodeled houses. I only showed you 4, but we actually remodeled 7 properties. That brought a lot of data. We knew what we might need. We knew what a remodel might need. Paint, painter's tape, measuring tape, coffee, chocolate, wine for sure, especially at the end of the day. And we also knew that my husband especially, and he will tell you this himself, there was a tendency to perhaps misplace things, like anything that ends in tape, measuring tape, painter's tape. We set it down, and then in a big house, you're like, where the heck did that thing go? So we knew that we might misplace that tape. And we knew that people, and especially the system that they're in, they have needs. So what do the people need? What does the system need? And how can you get ahead of both of those needs? I like to do data-driven decisions. I like to look at the data. So look at the data that you have about your team or your company and fill your table of need with the stuff that they typically need. You know you're going to need stuff. Keep that stuff close. This table was right in the middle of all of the activity. It was a place that people could go to. They could find screwdrivers. They could find painter's tape. They could find all of the tools that they needed to get the work done that they were trying to get done. They needed knowledge. Make sure that people who have the knowledge are close. They're available to the people who need the knowledge. Also, you know that you're going to lose stuff. So keep duplicates. We actually had probably 4 to 5 measuring tapes. We had multiple sets of painter's tape in case we lost it. So keep duplicates. You're going to run out of stuff. Have somebody who's ready to get more. You're going to learn stuff. Be ready to change your course. Agile 20 Reflect Festival has given us a chance to take a look, to reflect, to look back. Don't lose that opportunity. Many times we'll go ahead and listen to all these speakers, but personally reflecting on what perhaps you need and what perhaps the people around you need, and having a table of need, a place that acknowledges those needs, and a place that's readily accessible to all can make all the difference. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Colleen. I really enjoyed that. I know it's too early for questions, but I have one burning question I can't get in my head is, how did your 6 children react to stinky, smelly homes?
That's a really long story, but for the most part, they were really happy because think about where we were living in the places that we could afford, and they were pretty scary places. So there was a bit of a desire to make a better life for themselves as well.
Fantastic. That was great. Really enjoyed that. Love hearing the personal perspective. And just to close us out before we open it up to questions from you all. I'm sure you've got lots of questions for our wonderful speakers tonight. We're going to close out with a story around community from a friend and colleague of mine. Lindsay.
Thanks, Sass. Hello, everybody. Thanks for holding off, and nice to see some familiar faces. Lovely to see some new faces as well. I must confess, I felt a bit like the interloper when Sass invited me on the panel today. You see, I really only fell into Agile a few years ago, and it was entirely by accident. I was consulting at the NHS in Scotland at the time on the digital landscape, and Agile was introduced as the transformation program delivery framework. And I was asked, obviously didn't look busy that day, did I want to stay on and help with that work? I'm always up for a challenge, so I threw my hat in the ring, retrained as a Scrum Master, and after an initial period of intense discomfort, well, my mindset caught up with my burning ambition to see things done very differently, I was well and truly bitten by the Agile bug. Now, the hook that got me was the commitment to people over process. And I realised that throughout my entire career, I've advocated for that, but in a kind of aimless, whistling in a wind tunnel kind of way. I've always worked in engagement, so it's made absolute sense to me that Agile puts people at its heart. Not targets, not endless, pointless policies, reporting and frameworks that nobody will ever read or care about, but people. So from that intense period of awakening to the potential of Agile and discovering that there's a whole global movement behind this thing, it's been a natural progression for me to embrace the joys of working in Agile through the powerful lens of communities. So as part of my passion for that, I'm going to spend the rest of my 8 and a bit minutes giving you my take on how to build a community practice in just 12 seconds. Now, my hope is at the end of this lightning talk, if I don't talk too quickly, you will be committed in getting involved in the doing with communities that resonate with you. But first, time for a feel-good movie. Now, there isn't time to go out and get some popcorn, but for me, this is everything you will ever need to know about building a community of practice. Now, I expect most of you will have seen this already on social media. This clip is one of the most popular shares so far in 2021, and it lights all those lovely, warm, fuzzy vibes in the soul. The narrative surrounding this clip is that the badger and the coyote need to get to the other side of a very busy highway in California. It's a seemingly impossible task, but the coyote knows a way through the underpass and shows the badger the way safely, full of the joys of summer, making sure the badger keeps up as they go on their way and get across the road safely. Now, that's not such a willful suspension of disbelief as you might think, because studies do show that the most apparently unlikely of species actually have an innate ability to work together for a common good. With keeping that framing in mind, and hopefully the technology is going to work at this side, I'm going to play the clip. There really isn't any sound, so don't be expecting lots of noise, but let me see if I can play this. Hold on a second. Alrighty. Share. I'm going to share. Now, it's so quick. I'm going to show you it again. On, I know the way. Follow me. Alrighty, hopefully everybody could see that.
I didn't see it. I hope everybody else saw it.
Yeah,
It might have just been me.
Let me
No,
just
I
try.
think, yeah, I think
Let me
folk
try
didn't see
again.
it.
Let me try again.
Have
Apologies for
another
that.
go. We've got
Let's
to.
have another go. Let's
There you
have
are. There,
another
it's
go.
coming now. It's coming. It's coming. There you are.
Let it now. Worth the wait. Definitely worth the wait. And I'll show you it again because we did miss that first time. 12 seconds of your life you won't want back. How cute is this? And off they go. Safely on their adventures. So, how on earth is this really cute animal clip got anything to do with how to create a community of practice? Well, to answer that, we have to look at the construct of the 3 essential pillars that make up communities of practice, or as I like to call them, good cops. Some of you on the call will probably have heard that before. And these animals so beautifully demonstrate the construct of a good cop. So the 3 pillars on which all communities stand, the kind of magic sauce that transforms a gathering of people with intent, or indeed a badger and a coyote, turns that into a community of practice, a good community practice. Now, the first of these pillars is domain. Domain basically sets out that a community practice isn't just a club of friends or a network of connections between people. It's got its own identity defined by that shared single domain of interest. Now, for our furry friends, this was a desire to get safely across a busy highway. Membership of a community of practice therefore implies a commitment to that particular domain, critically a shared drive for competence that distinguishes members from other people. The second of our pillars is community, in other words, people or animals. And in pursuing their interest in their domain, COP members engage in joint activities. They help each other through shared learning and information. This is all about people. Now, after all, we learn better when we learn together. People build relationships that help them to learn from each other. People build a community of people. Now, practice is our third essential element in successful communities of practice. That a COP is not a community of interest. So it's not people who just like to get together to enjoy certain types of books or movies or classic cars, or even people who work on the same types of projects. Now, the key thing here is that members of a community practice are practitioners. The clue is in the title. And they develop a shared repertoire of resources like experience or stories or tools, ways of coming together to swarm around a problem, like critically a shared practice. And then that is an inherent promise to give in order to receive. It's a place where people feel safe and they naturally belong. Take a little closer look at the idea of belonging. Fiona Robertson's a culture and leadership expert, and she's the author of The Rules of Belonging. Now, she says that the human beings have a brain that is essentially a threat detection pattern recognition machine. Now, by that, what she means is it's designed to keep us alive by keeping us safe. And coming back to what Colleen said about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, she argues that while Maslow's hierarchy says that food and water and shelter and Wi-Fi are the most basic human needs, in reality, latest neuroscience tells us that the most basic human need is in fact to belong in groups. Now that's because 70,000 years ago, if you weren't a member of a group, you wouldn't get access to food or water or shelter, and you would die. So the brain is hardwired to tell us that if you don't belong, well, you're toast. Good cops, therefore, feed that hardwired need people have to belong in groups. Now, I have seen in some organisations a move towards mandating attendance at COPs. It's a public demonstration of learning commitment. I'm going to be really clear here. A community of practice, which is mandated, where attendance is recorded, is not a community of practice. Instead, it's simply an accident of achieving a certain grade, people working together, sitting on a specific team and having a particular job title. In short, it's a training session. So it should be billed and embraced as that. You see, well, it's true that these people will have things in common and generally they will interact and to a certain extent learn together. They don't actually form a community practice in its truest sense because the inherent commitment and passion and shared expertise that keeps people together as a community is weakened. Now, that ultimately creates an environment of terminal decline. If members are forced to join, the tendency of them being uncooperative is high. Let's imagine this. We put a badger and a coyote in a room without the shared intent to safely cross a busy road. How differently do you think they would experience each other and find a commonality to explore? Emily Weber, author of Building Successful Communities of Practice, agrees. Now, she highlights 4 key elements of communities. She says these are membership, influence, fulfillment of needs, and emotional connection. But she too stresses that members have to feel they're getting something out of it, or they won't take part. Now, of course, good cops have no hierarchy. There is no royal order of longevity of service or importance of prescribed expertise. The actual dynamic purpose of community involves learning and giving on the part of everyone, no matter your grade or what your shiny LinkedIn profile says. Let's go back to the superhero in our 12-second story, our coyote. Cop superheroes are the first followers. They're the brave ones, the driven, who emulate the story of your community. and make it their own, and they intertwine it with their own career success. These superheroes are the characters who live to innovate and problem solve. They invent new practices, they create new knowledge, they define new territory, and they develop a collective and a strategic voice with a burning desire to learn and share with each other. Now, artful facilitation is very important to the success of any coffee helps increase your membership and traction. We've got a masterclass in that today with Saf and with Shelby. But it is so important to encourage all members of your community to participate. And this is where your superheroes come into their own again. They offer visible support and mentorship across your community, enabling others to see the positive results of their involvement. So in the last few minutes, we've covered the 3 pillars of domain and community and practice, and we've explored why natural belonging is so important. So it's kind of time already to think about rounding up. It's the quickest 10 minutes ever. And while I'd love to do that by sharing my insights, that I've left you all with this profound sense of knowledge and insight and learning, and you're going to take that and share that, and you're going to create a new community of knowing, if not practice. But actually, in truth, I think probably our furry friends, despite the glitch of getting them running first, have probably left you with enough of an impact, and I am not going to compete with an excitable coyote. Instead, I'm going to leave you all with a challenge. What if we all made a commitment to be more coyote? What if we create or support communities by the simple action of doing, of taking part, of actual practice? Now, you only need to look at this incredible Agile 20 Reflect global festival to see the power of people coming together and taking part, not watching from the sidelines, and how that can transform even the biggest global visions into successful delivery. My challenge is, let's show up that bravely. Let's commit to the ambition of inclusive, immersive, and meaningful learning, problem solving for the greater good with the single aim of gathering to give rather than receive. Now, if we're looking to create the next 20 years of Agile together, I challenge us all to be more coyote and look at communities of practice as so essential to that ambition. I suppose it's a bit like working together to find the underpass to safely get to the other side of a busy road. What a journey that will be. Thanks, Saf.
Fantastic. Absolutely awesome. Yeah. It's so just so you all know, Lindsay runs the Agile community of practice at our work, and she does a truly phenomenal job. But as she says, you know, it's that sense of community and truly nurturing, creating that. Yeah, that there's a lot of heart that goes into that, and Lindsay brings that to the community of practice that we have in our org. That was brilliant. I loved all of those fabulous stories. Great to see everyone's personalities coming through. We still have about 35 minutes. Just going to offer this to our speakers before we see what questions we've got. Do you want to kind of quick couple of minutes break? Do you want to step up, stretch your legs, grab a coffee, take a comfort break? Dave's off. Sounds good. Yep. Happy for you to do that. Yeah, just so they fair. I learned that from the wonderful Joanna Rothman, because when the sessions are long, she said, "Saf, you've got to give people a break. It's really important." So I've took on board that feedback. So yeah, you got a few minutes, folks, to do whatever it is you want to do.
How many minutes, Saf?
Yeah, take 3 minutes. Yeah, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. It's cool. I won't play any music or anything. Don't worry. The opening ceremonies. I can, but I won't. I won't even tell any jokes. I'll take some questions if anyone wants. If anyone has any interesting things they want to share or reflections on the festival so far, be delighted to hear them. Oh, I heard a voice there. I can't see everyone. Somebody want to...
Yeah, it's me.
Hello. Oh, hi. Yeah. I'm Anu.
I have a couple.
How you doing?
Happy to see you again. I'm going to shoot straight out of the hip. One for Colleen, just to make sure I understood it correctly. The Kanbans in the 1600s were just signs in front of shops? Were they like brands regarded as like guarantees of quality or something, or did they? I understood they had no process oriented meaning.
I was taking a little break, so Colleen might have stepped away. I can't see her. She has actually. So this was just a kind of little. So I was just more thinking if you wanted to share something generally rather than pose a question to the speaker. So we've got a few minutes, but you could definitely pose that question to Colleen when she returns. But it's more if anybody wanted to kind of share anything generally about experiences so far, or ask me any questions. I'm happy to take
Saf, it's John.
questions. Hey, John.
Can I ask, as I missed the opening ceremony, has it been recorded?
Yes.
Yes,
we can watch back again.
Yeah, we're recording everything.
Fabulous.
So
Cool.
you'll find everything. You'll find everything on the YouTube channel, John.
Cool,
Everything-
because it
everything's
sounds like I really did miss an event there.
Yeah.
It was great. It was good. It was fabulous. Actually, it was amazing how many people turned up, and it really got the festival off to an amazing start. I don't think Shelby and I and others who'd helped kind of shape it could have hoped for anything else. You know, it was an amazing turnout. There was fun. There was joy. There was laughter. There was music. There was dance. You know, a lot of really good kind of reflections on what it took to put it together. And yeah, so many people came from so many backgrounds and communities and cultures. It was, yeah, I think it really set the tone for the festival. So is that fair to say, Shelby?
Oh my God, yeah, without a doubt. I remember dancing at one point, and then like when it all finished and everybody went home and just the trustees kind of got together just to have a bit of a download, we all just kind of like, it was like, oh my God, that we were just all giddy with excitement and drinking. We had like a drink and cheers. It was just, oh, sorry, we didn't drink, we just cheered. And it was just awesome. It was just awesome. We got to, you know, realizing months of just everybody giving up their time and personal, you know, just personal time to give up and just come and be involved. It's just awesome. And for me, that is also what a great community is. Just coming together of minds to for sharing a common purpose. I love it. It's just, yeah. And I don't think I've come down. I'm on like day 4 and I'm like, woohoo.
No, absolutely, no, 100%. And as I said at the start, you know, just at the opening of the session, I mean, the most amazing thing about this is it's been built by so many volunteers around the globe. It's like a truly global effort, and you know, ourselves as trustees and all those who've supported us, we've kind of self-organized around the things that needed to be done in this quite incredible way. It's just like we've just gravitated to the stuff that needed to be done, the jobs that need to be done, what are the priorities, all kind of incredibly naturally. It really is, it really has been quite an experience. It really has.
Sat, would you say it's because of the global pandemic that it sort of has provided that foundation that people are looking for something to bring people together, or do you think it would have happened without COVID-19? If you don't mind me asking.
No, I think it's a brilliant question. And to be honest, I think it's something that we should probably be discussing over the course of the festival and reflecting on that. I mean, we're doing that, but I think in other groups, people are doing that. So Scott and I and Shelby Fields, I mean, I think I shared a post just as it kicked off to say that I personally felt that, you know, this was something to give us all that opportunity to pause and stop and reflect and, you know, express joy, as Lisa Atkins would say, in the backdrop of, you know, the global pandemic, because the global pandemic has created enormous challenges for everyone around the world and has been very difficult and taken its toll on a lot of people. And having this opportunity is unique, but had it not been for COVID, I think we probably would have been going about it differently. I think the global effort would probably have looked different. But yeah, I'm guessing.
And do you think it's because one of the impacts of the pandemic is the lack of being able to hug people? I mean, you know, you can't go out as much, you can't interact as much, you're discouraged from doing anything, and this is an opportunity to sort of to have that connection a little bit. I mean, this is a very you know, I do a lot of these things, and this is a very informal but very nice, very comfortable environment that you've created, the invitation that you provided, and it's kind of nice. And humans are all right, or most of them. Well, some of them. Well, a few of them.
You haven't seen
Most of them, you could find the good in anyone. My nan was that type of person. She somehow had this
So
gift
was mine.
for seeing like the good in everyone, and I don't think we all have that superpower. But she used to do that, and it was incredible how she did. But you know, a lot of that's been covered today, and that's why I was really chuffed because I inherited this session from Carl. I picked this one up, but you know, the more I got into it, and Martin and I had a chat early on, I think this sort of stuff I really love because it's the stories, people's stories, that authentic personal touch that you've all brought tonight. And I'm sure, you know, we'll go on in a minute to get some questions from our wonderful audience. But yeah, you know, everything you covered about, you know, your meeting with Ken, Portia's stories about, you know, our pilgrimage to Snowbird, Colleen's, you know, application of, you know, agile methods in real life, you know, Lindsay's stories. It's amazing. And that's really, for I think a lot of us, what Agile is about. It is about people. You know, I put that debate to my panelists yesterday, but I don't feel like we necessarily entirely see that in our workplaces. And that's something I think we should be debating as part of this festival and thinking about what we can all do about that. You know, we all have a part to play. We all have a responsibility. We all have something to offer. And that's one of the things. But, you know, we want to see what emerges. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now because I could go on and on and on. Shelby, what questions have we got? We got some tasty questions for our guest speakers.
I do indeed, yes. I had quite a few pop in into my inbox. So I'm actually going to start with Martin first. Martin, a question was asked, how do we change this to ensure schools change the way of schooling for our new generation of children? So how do we apply that?
That is a really good question, and I would actually I would point you at what the things that are happening in the Netherlands. Netherlands is so far ahead of the rest of us in this; it is ridiculous. They have something called EduScrum, which you can go Google for. You can find a lot of information about it, and it started as a very small thing, like one teacher in one group in one school, and it has spread across the Netherlands. And Dave will comment on that. This is one of the reasons that the Netherlands has almost as many Scrum trainers as the US, even though the US has 320,000 people in it, 320 million people, and the Netherlands has 20 million people. They're doing Scrum on a scale that is not visible in any other country in the world. And I think part of that is because it's coming in through the education system. Kids are being taught it at school. They're coming home and they're talking about the different ways of working with their parents. And their parents are thinking, well, that's a good idea. Maybe we can do some of that as well. Dave, do you want to add something?
Can I add a couple of things? So I'm fortunate enough that I get invited to talk to a lot of these things. I think the reason why the Netherlands ultimately is into agile approaches is because when you build a country below sea level, empiricism, feedback, continuous learning, very important. You know, is that water? Very important. Discipline, you know. So it's interesting. I think that the Netherlands has come to the realization that teaching people how to work together in an effective way in education is actually something that needs to be taught. That isn't something that organically happens. You know, we all got group projects in high school or whatever, you know, upper school. But I think they've appreciated that. And I think they're a little bit before, you know, there's other places, actually, Singapore's doing it now, actually. Other parts of Asia are starting to explore doing these more group-oriented projects and not just in STEM, which is ever so interesting. I think that's the first step. And then you start looking at, well, how do you get teams to work? You know, Taylorism doesn't lend itself very quickly to a school environment, you know, in terms of how you can actually do it. So I think it's that realization that's crucial. And I think that, as Martin said, we're starting to see a lot of that throughout the world. fingers crossed that our children, or at least their children, will be taught in a very different way.
So I would just add that there's so many teachers that are bucking the standard of the education system and working with kids in that ways. My kids in school don't necessarily get that talked at, you must learn everything type of mentality that I had at school. They certainly have a lot more group projects, a lot more not self-study, but that where they study together and then present to the rest of the class. Yeah, I think it is starting to change. It's just slow because, like us working in business, the system is stacked against us. And you've just got to overcome some of those things or be a ninja. As some of the folks I know, even in organizations, create a safe space to do the right thing, even if the organization's not enabling that.
It's a great response from the both of you. And actually that brings me then on to your good self, Dave. There's a question here that says, Dave, you pulled out HR. You talked about pulling out HR. What did you replace it with?
So when we said that, actually, I tried to reply to that on the thing. But what's interesting is the HR. So when we were a small team, there was like less than 20 of us. There was a Scrum team of about 5 people building product. They hiring, all of that stuff. We just literally items on the, like we had this issue with the law in Canada about hiring contractors and stuff, and nobody could deal with it. So it came onto the backlog and it was just dealt with in the team. As we grew to, more than 5-6 teams, we pulled out many of those things and put them into a specialist function. And then we realized quite quickly that the best people to actually hire, yes, some of the legal stuff, fair enough, it was good to have that, but we had lawyers to do that. But it was good to actually embed that in the team and allow teams to make decisions. For 2 reasons. One, because they're the best people to know what they need and who they need. And secondly, when it goes horribly wrong, which most hiring does, they've got nobody else to blame. So they have to make it work, which was very, very important to us as we had challenges, like everybody does when you hire. So that was an example, but it wasn't, the whole planning process, the roadmap. After a while, it became more this sort of specialist product function where historically we'd left it with the team. And Ken was railing against all of this. It was like, don't, just allow, they're smart people. They'll work it out. Stop parenting them. He didn't talk about trust as much as he talked about parenting and that sort of like looking after them too much. The team will be fine. Just direct them in the right way and they'll be fine, and then support them when they need it and let them shout when they do. And we went back to those principles, and it took us a bit of time to do that. But we really did. It's harder when you're in a bigger organization where these ideas are installed in people's careers and people's lives. I know they're all idiots. They just don't get Scrum or Agile or Kanban. Really? Their success, the position that they had, their future mortgage payments, their kids' college education, their ability to buy a bigger house, somewhere else, is all tied intrinsically. And until you can address those things, I know I wouldn't bloody change either. I'll tell you, it's like trying to persuade the French royalty that the revolution is going to be good. But what about that guillotine? No, just ignore the guillotine. It's going to be fabulous. Look, equality, fidelity, lots more wine. But the guillotine, yeah, there's a guillotine, but let's just don't worry about that. I mean, imagine that conversation. It's really hard. These are human beings, and Martin rails against Taylorism, but without it, we wouldn't have many of the things, the railways that we travel on. Okay, in America very infrequently, but yeah, the roads, the toilets, the plumbing, electricity. Yes, there's lots wrong with it, but there's also lots right with it. It helped us do things, and we have to embrace those things and somehow position it. It's tricky. It very is tricky, and watch out for the guillotine.
No, I don't think anybody would like to be in the guillotine. That's a great question. I'm going to come to you next, Portia. So there's a question here that says, how do you identify and address agile zombie patterns?
I find that it's most useful to look in the mirror ourselves, because at the end of the day, we can only change ourselves. And that's why I spent a lot of time traveling in the last year in my own timeline, because I think one of the things about the bottlenecks that Colleen mentioned is that very early on in my career, I discovered that, frustratingly enough, that I was the bottleneck to any productivity or learning of a system that I would interact with. And consequently, I guess I went about it a bit martial arty, although I'm more into the yoga and the yin yoga. But, you know, it was all about self-practice. And I think over the years, I myself have noticed I'm much more effective and enjoyable and pleasant to work with as a result of that. And I think I could have solved problems much earlier, because the zombieism isn't the issue, right? It's the rotting arm or the bite you haven't noticed on your own arm that is the issue, isn't it? And it's by doing that, I find that that's the most effective way, rather than looking outwards.
Great, thank you, Portia. Colleen, a question here for you that says, how have you harnessed Kanban to educate your stakeholders or bosses to get your change to goal?
Say that one more time. I'm sorry. How
have you harnessed Kanban to educate your stakeholder or bosses from for changing to goal orientated?
Yeah, so that's a great question. How have I harnessed so Kanban is all about evolutionary change, right? It's not about big change. It's about seeing what the small things are that we need to change, and perhaps even setting targets or landing spots, landing zones, if you want to call them, where we know we want to get way here, but we're not going to be able to get there in this system in this particular moment, but maybe we can get this far.
That's a great answer, thank you. And then Lindsay, a question here for you. The question is, so would you say the first pillar is purpose or goal?
So if we're looking at the pillars of community, so what are the strong things that we're going to stand on, then I would say that domain is your first pillar. So within that, what is it that people are coming to swarm around? What is the single theme? What does that look like? Now that can be as wide or as narrow as that community needs it to be. There's no prescribed, you can't have a community practice unless you've got 20 people. Do you know what? I'd rather have 5 people in a room committed to being practitioners of that community than 50 people coming on a call and 49 of them are on static image screens and they're not taking part and they're not asking questions. So it's not about the numbers. What it is about is that what is it they're coming to swarm around? It's a community of people, but actually, crucially, third pillar, are they taking part in practicing?
Fabulous, thanks Lindsay, that's awesome. And then it's a general panel question to all of you. This is open to all of you. So the question is, can the panel give a personal view when they encounter people bottlenecks? What tactic strategies do you employ to uncork?
I have a story on that one. So my husband was at the bottleneck. By the way, people think of, I hope you don't take away from what I said that people are the bottleneck. They are not. They're standing at the bottleneck. And the bottleneck is often a process. Perhaps it's even pride. So my husband's very skilled and he had a particular goal that he was trying to reach and he was doing it on his own. All on his own because he's the only one who's skilled enough to do that. But at some point he actually was unavailable. And so that work did not progress. That goal was not achieved. He was prideful. He did not want to admit that perhaps he was out of his own skill set. He couldn't do it necessarily. And so what I did is I actually said, hey, sweetheart, you know what? You're very skilled at doing tile, but you're going to be unavailable tomorrow. Do you think that you could teach Oscar, who, by the way, had never done a thing of tile before, ever? Do you think you could teach him so that perhaps even tomorrow when you're not available, he could continue on? So introducing some sort of pairing together was really, really important to resolve that bottleneck. It was more important that the work continue than that the person who was the most skilled in that work actually did it.
Anybody else? Okay. I've got another open panel question. It says, Lindsay mentioned the thing that hooked me onto the Agile journey was, what was the most memorable personal interactions that inspired you to be a brave change agent and carry on helping teams? And that is to all of you.
I'm just thinking that's actually a really good one. I think it's really hard to, certainly I'm probably the newest to Agile ways of working across the panel here, and for me the kind of people element was a frustration, really very much a frustration of people wanting things to go better, wanting to be part of something that actually they could see value in delivering, you know. And I think that it was really good to hear Martin's session first off about that thing. People don't want to sit in rows. You know, we weren't born to be in boxes or silos, or we weren't born for that. You know, we're people and we bring different levels of passion, and yes, different levels of commitment and different levels of actually wanting to be there in the room. But how about we have those conversations and we start to engage with people to do that? And for me, the kind of the communities element of Agile allows us to actually bring people together out with those very confines of the rows and rows and rows that they found themselves working in. So that means there wasn't a single point. It was just a kind of culmination of 20 years of going, yeah, but that's not right. And then suddenly this light bulb off, but look how we could do this. And that for me was that kind of epiphanous moment, if there's such a thing. Good question though. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, I like that question too. I think my background is engineering, is software development. I was a software developer for 20 years, and I moved into DevOps well before I really even knew there was a thing called Scrum. Well, back in the day, it wasn't called DevOps; it was Application Lifecycle Management. But to use the ancient term for that, but I saw people working so poorly, and we were trying to solve all of the problems with tools. My MVP is in DevOps from Microsoft, which is Azure DevOps. Yeah. And I use that tool a lot. I love that tool. I think it's great. Colleen doesn't like it. I can see that. I think it's a great tool. It doesn't do certain things very well, but it does other things really well. And I realized kind of very early on as a DevOps consultant that tools don't solve problems. People solve problems. No matter how awesome your tools are, if the world that the people live in sucks, it's still going to suck. So you have to unsuck that first, and it doesn't matter if you have an awesome team, right? They'll unsuck the tools themselves. I'm using a technical term, by the way, my engineering background. They'll unsuck the tools themselves. They don't need tools foisted upon them. That was where I came from anyway.
It's interesting. It's very similar to Martin's point for me. I realized I didn't know everything. And and that sounds really sort of arrogant that I ever thought that I did. And maybe looking at it like that, maybe I didn't, it wasn't quite as explicit as that. But telling people what to do was what RUP was all about. And it really did a lot of it. Thousands of pages of telling you what to do. And I sort of went through this realization as I worked with more and more teams that the world is really messy and complicated. And instead of telling people what to do, giving them the right questions to ask and a framework that asks those questions is the right way to approach it. And so I've accepted my frailty. I've accepted the undeniable Buddhist mantra of there's no such thing as the truth, but the pursuit of it is honorable. And I sort of came to that realization, starting in an insurance company in the middle of America, but reinforced on over and over again. I wrote a book called Head First Object-Oriented Analysis and Design, catchy title. My grandmother described it as the best book she's ever owned for killing spiders. Anyway, so because it was heavy and white clean, which I thought was great testament to that. And as we were doing that, I was writing that with a couple of other people because it's a big book, lots of code in it. I was like trying to make them do things that were just so silly. And because the problem wasn't, and it was just, yeah, and they all came to so I just realized I didn't know enough to tell people what to do, but I could help them find out for themselves. A bit like what Marnie said about not giving them tools and telling them to use them, and they're idiots if they can't. Instead, giving them the idea and appreciation of the value of doing certain things and the trade-offs that creates. And I think that was my realization.
Wow. And actually, so I've got a really good question that might then come to you, Dave. It's the statement says, "Oh, you were called an idiot." We love that. But how did it really make you feel at the time?
Oh,
and be honest.
I mean, honestly, I thought, who was this guy? He's got like, he's not making, I've got thousands of users, you know, I've got the biggest process in the world and I'm in charge of it. And you coming along and you calling me an idiot. And he did it with a smirk, of course, you know, that is Ken's way. I wasn't particularly happy. And Martin knows from his interactions, I now would have applied in it. So why is he calling me that? I'd have tried to empathize with him and all that. But at that point, I was, you know, my early 30s, and I thought, no, you're the idiot. You just don't understand it because you're not smart enough, you know, which obviously he's incredibly smart. And I didn't know that then. And that's how I felt. And I think that's the problem often, you know, that we have this sort of like ego that all of us have. And, you know, and I have one. Totally respect. I am complete, you know, I'm a geezer, right? Like some of us, half of us, I guess 49%. But and it sometimes gets in the way, you know, and I think that you need to step back. And what I should have done is try to understand why he said that, try to ask him more questions, build a bridge between us, and then ultimately I'd have learned more. And maybe I could have taken Rupp somewhere that would have been incredibly better than where we ended up being taken, and then not used, you know, obviously it's not used now.
Wow. I've got a wealth of questions, so I'm trying to get through, and I want to give an opportunity if anybody else wanted to speak and not you, my dulcet tones.
I was just going to say, we've got about 4 minutes, maybe. I think I could maybe squeeze the close into 2. I'll do my best. So yeah, maybe got time for a couple of questions.
Should I go, Sam?
Oh, Mark, of course you can. Of course you can. Be my guest.
I'd like to say thanks to the panelists, because you've given me a headache for next Monday. Collectively, I'm going into a Steerco Exco with an agenda next Monday that consists of a status report and some finances for 3 months. I'm actually going to change it. We're going to talk about a community practice, then we're going to play some games, then I'm going to look about putting Kanban and Scrum in, and then how can I take Taylorism out of a 500,000 people organization. So thank you for that. I've changed my whole agenda. But I wanted to say, you guys flow very well. Is that almost a synergy that you're finding now, that even though you come from disparate backgrounds, you can start with the kind of agile Scrum mentality and then bring your own other personalities and experiences into it?
Yeah, I guess we all share the same melody, even though we, you know, our lyrics are different, our styles are different, but we are unified. It's like I choose a music analogy because I know nothing about music, but it seems to be Bono. I don't know. Bono, when he talks about how he does, obviously he's an activist, and he says he brings melody to activism. And Bill Gates, for instance, who's another activist in climate change and and vaccines and the like. And Bill Gates brings brains, you know, but melody brings people together, and then Bill Gates. So I think we've got that shared melody that and also I think purpose, maybe. I know. What does everybody else think?
I think the purpose brings enthusiasm. When you have, and I think that's one of the advantages, that doesn't matter what flavor of agility you're talking about. We talk about a goal-based model. You got to figure out, what are you trying to achieve? What's the value you want to get as an organization at every level on the way down? And then we're working towards achieving those goals, so we as individuals can see how we contribute to the overall goals. So then we're enthused because we're doing something that actually matters to people. And because it matters and it makes a difference, you get excited about it, you get into that, and you can do that with your products. You can do that inside of organizations. There's many organizations out there that have, the example I always use, I know lots of people don't like Microsoft, but Microsoft has gone from a waterfall organization 10 years ago, and they've completely changed the way they do business. They've changed everything about how they operate, how they do business, to move towards that no more than 1 month cadence. And if even a team like the Windows team, which was full of stodgy folks that wouldn't work together, wanted to go off and do their own thing and not talk to each other. I don't know if you know, but there's 4,500 software engineers working on Windows every single day. And they've managed to bring that together into communities, into groups of people doing A/B testing and engaging with users. And you can do it at any scale. People, that's the important part.
Quite well said, Martin. I'd love to keep this going. Oh, Portia's got, come on, Portia.
Yeah, I think Dave's point about the ego is useful, and about the self-awareness, and Colleen and I are just chatting about the films, but for me it's about Trolls World Tour. So you can choose to break up all the music strings and have rock take over the world. But if rock took over the world, then everybody would just be rock zombies, whereas you could have pop and all the different kinds of music, just like Dave was saying. And I think that's what it is, isn't it? To find it in a place in a heart that other people can exist too. Yeah.
I would just add to that as well. Totally agree. And I know Sav, you're trying to round up, and there's nothing worse than folk are talking and you're looking at the clock, but I promise I'll be quick.
So good, so good.
For me, it's kind of like the Impressionists. So they used to meet together in cafes and studios, and they would talk about their styles of painting that they were inventing together. I mean, they were one of the, I suppose, not original communities, but, you know, a community. And these interactions were great because that allowed them to come together to feel like they were part of this bigger thing. But then they went off and they painted alone. You know, they didn't all stand together and paint one picture. And for me, that's the place we're in right now, is that we're coming together. And that's why it seems so seamless in a way, so kind of integrated, is because we all have that passion to paint. But our own pictures, well, that's up to us to create. So I think it's easy at this point because it's easy to see the passion for what it is that we're trying to actually create together.
Fabulous. I was actually going to ask you all, as I often like to do, to give a closing remark, but you all did that so naturally, so I didn't have to do anything, so that was dead easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give Colleen the chance to quickly give a closing remark, and then I'm just going to wrap up. So Colleen, give us a final little thought, because everybody else did that very naturally. I would hate to leave you out.
Absolutely. So I start to think about values and principles, right? That's what this whole Agile thing is all about. It's about a set of values that we can identify with, and the why, the whole why. Why are we doing this in the first place? My family did what they did. My 8-year-old child painted a wall because she wanted something that she didn't have. And maybe that's what it's all about. What do we want that we don't currently have? And how could Agile help us reach that?
Fabulous. Well, thank you for that. No, you've all shared great insights. I've loved hearing your personal stories. It came together so much better than I thought it would. So there you go. It's credit to you all. This is my 5th one on the trot. So it's been wonderful. Just to say thank you to you all. Great to have you here. Martin and I have known each other for a good few years now. I've learned a lot from Martin. Dave, I didn't really know Dave, but great honour to have you here, sir, today. Portia, Colleen, and my good friend and colleague, Lindsay. Thank you to you all. If you wouldn't mind unmuting for a second, if you're happy to do so, and join me in giving our speakers a wonderful round of applause. Well deserved. Fabulous as ever. You were all awesome. And thank you all for joining us and engaging and participating and asking such wonderful questions. I hope you're enjoying the festival and continue to join other sessions. I don't know what I've got lined up next, but I'm sure I've got something in my calendar tomorrow. And I'll get the recording out as soon as I can for anyone who missed it or had to drop off. But thank you for joining us. And let's keep everything going. Keep asking the questions. Let's be open-minded. Let's connect. And let's see what we can achieve. Thank you all. Take care. Stay safe.
Thanks for organising this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shelby.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cool.